We have a very distinguished speaker at lunch that we are absolutely thrilled to have as our new professor of practice at the Center for Politics here. He is joining Liz Cheney as our other professor of practice, so we've got two incredible stars, and we're thrilled. We absolutely are thrilled. If you did not go to the Chamber Singers event last night, you really missed something, because it was absolutely amazing. And maybe we can get a video of it out so everybody can see it. But Professor King, remember that is his current title, Professor King. He has many titles, but you're going to use Professor King here. Did an amazing job just talking to the group, and then surprised the singers and the rest of us by asking for permission, which you certainly didn't have to ask for, to sing with the chamber singers at the end. And it was a very special song, and I'm going to let you tell the rest of that, because it was an experience that those students will never forget, and the rest of us in the audience will never forget. And thank you for doing that. That's the kind of spontaneity that makes history. So let me just bring up your introducer before I go on too long, which they always say to me as I leave: you went on too long. Okay, so I'm trying to avoid that. This introducer is a good friend. I knew her father long before I knew her. Sonia Howell Perkins. And she came all the way from California to do this. She was a member of our board and one of the strongest supporters of the Center for Politics, and not just financially, though she was that, but also in terms of helping us understand what we were doing and trying to do it better. And Sonia, we thank you for that. And Sonia has the distinct honor of introducing Professor Martin Luther King III. Please come up, Sonia.
I love the music. I have to say it's really an honor for me to be the introducer of Professor Martin Luther King III for many reasons, but one is kind of special related to my dad. So on February 27th of this year, it would have been my dad's 89th birthday, and I got an email from Ken Stroop, and he said, would you be interested in helping to sponsor Martin Luther King III's Professorship of Practice at the Center for Politics? It turns out it was a day after my dad's birthday. And I said yes, because we have this incredible story in our family, which I actually didn't learn until my husband won the midweek trophy in Oslo, Norway for sailing. And as part of that, you have to drink a whole bottle of champagne out of a trophy. And he and his three friends who were also sailing got to do this. And my dad was with me because he's Norwegian, and so is my mom. And he said, you know, the last time I was here, turns out it was December 10th, 1964, was when Martin Luther King Jr. won the Nobel Peace Prize. And I was like, what? You know, and it was true. And he really cared about Black people and Black people at UVA, and he did a lot to recruit Black professors as well as Black graduate students of engineering. And this just fit so well with my father and our family's vision. And I'm just incredibly honored to be here to introduce him. So our speaker is the oldest son of the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Mrs. Coretta Scott King, Professor Martin Luther King III. He is the thought leader on the world stage and a peacemaker and a negotiator on some of today's most critical national and international platforms for social change. Last evening, he made his first appearance on stage, the same stage where his father spoke 61 years ago on March 25th, 1963. So life is circular, isn't it? Amplifying his father's work, Mr. King has devoted his life to promoting global human rights, eradicating racism, violence, and poverty. Referring to by his father as the triple evils or the scourges of humankind worldwide. Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone here, it's my honor to welcome our very, very special speaker for lunch, Professor Martin Luther King III.
Good afternoon. And I first must thank God for the opportunity to be back at the University of Virginia on this most significant occasion for the Center for Politics, 25 years of incredible leadership and vision. Professor Larry Sabato and the entire team. Also, congratulations on over half a century of imparting and sharing information for young minds that are doing wonderful things in our nation and world. Thank you so much. Now, it is a special honor to be a professor at this university in practice. Focus on practice. If you like what I say, great. But if you don't, remember it's practice. So as we embark on this journey, and I believe that humankind somehow has to be reemerged. Because in our lives, in my 66 years, I don't ever remember us being as divided as we are. It's all right to disagree. It's all right to debate. In fact, my mother and father showed us how to disagree without being disagreeable. And many of our great politicians have done that over the years, up until just a few years ago. So we need to really be asking the question, what must we do to re-engage and bring civility back? Again, it doesn't mean we have to agree on everything, but it does mean we can do it in a fashion where we are not so disagreeable that we are at each other's necks and going towards a form of non-existence. My dad used to say we must learn nonviolence or we may face non-existence. It is very difficult to think about that, but it also is very real. So it is up to all of us to help create that climate. This afternoon, I'm going to try to be brief. I come out of a family, as you know, of Baptist preachers. My great-grandfather was, my grandfather was, my father and his brother were, my sister is, my cousins are. I'm not, but I was inspired by my environment and where I was raised. What is good and is going to help us is we have the honor to see this incredible panel that's coming up. So I'm going to be short because I always want to hear from those who help frame and get us to thinking about what is going on in our nation. So, and plus I was told to be 10 minutes, but I maybe a little longer than that, but not much. Among so many creative initiatives that Professor Sabato and his team have done is, of course, Sabato's Crystal Ball website, where smart students and writers go for incisive and nuanced analysis of American politics. Another reason I'm delighted to join you on this occasion is that we are also marking the 61st anniversary of my father, Martin Luther King Jr.'s address to the University of Virginia, which he delivered here on March 25th, 1963. I'm going to stop for one moment because last night was phenomenal. I'm not sure that I knew what to expect. Always through music we are inspired, but it was such a beautiful, beautiful ceremony, along with teaching history that maybe some of us may have forgotten, but also the music and how it was arranged was beautiful. And I had a unique opportunity of singing with the students, which is always good because if you're not a really good singer, you can just kind of blend in. And so I didn't have to project, but it was amazing to be able to sing Lift Every Voice and Sing, which is known as the Black National Anthem. Such a beautiful song. And to be here I had a bragging moment because our Secretary of State, Ben Rafflesberger, was here. And we all know what he did, which took a lot of courage. And I told him that, Mr. Secretary, I want to share some words of my father that apply to what your actions were in a difficult time. Dad used to say the ultimate measure of a human being is not where they stand in times of comfort and convenience, but where one stands in times of challenge and controversy. And I said, Mr. Secretary, you personify that. You stood tall. What he did was the right thing, by the way. But under the circumstances in the state of Georgia, he could have done something different. But he chose to stand in integrity. And our nation benefits from that in relationship to whether democracy is going to be preserved or not. Because that's kind of where we are. Whether you acknowledge it or not, maybe some people are not interested in democracy. But we've been going all over the world promoting democracy and sharing with nations. We can show you how to do it well. But it's very frustrating and perplexing for us to promote democracy abroad and suppress democracy at home. And we don't even think about it. Oh, well, we're not doing that, but yes, we are. There are young people and seniors, and Latino and Hispanic members of our community, and African American communities, where it is hard to vote. It shouldn't be. Voting should be the easiest thing on the planet to do. But yet, we are making it more and more difficult under the auspices of we just want to make sure there's no fraud. There's very, 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 very little fraud in our elections. There may be some, and we need to correct that. But it's not enough to put provisions in place to make it difficult for people to vote. We need to even look at maybe voting with our smartphones. Now you may say, well, I don't know about that. Well, you pay your bills that way. I know I do. I have never had a creditor call me and say, we didn't receive your payment. So if we can secure our payments of bills, can't we do the same thing for our voting? That's one thing that might increase participation. And I would like to see as many people vote in elections as possible. Dad used to say, a voteless people is a powerless people. And one of the most important steps that we can take is that short step to the ballot box. We have to keep that front and center. Because this year will be one of the most critical election years ever. And I hope that that is front and center on all of our minds. You know, there are a few maybe students here, and I want to say something specifically to young people. Because one of the things we must do is to bring and encourage more people to come into political space, more young people. Think about this. If you're in the ROTC, you go to college for 4 years, when you graduate, you are a commanding officer, a lieutenant, which means that you have a platoon of soldiers who you actually lead. So if we can lead in the military at 21 years old, why not can we offer ourselves for public office, for school boards, for county commissioners, for state legislative positions, in some communities, mayors. And most of those jobs, by the way, are part-time jobs. But we need the inspiration or the vision of young people. And that may, in fact, encourage more young people, meaning young people running, to engage in the process of politics. I can't imagine what totally my father would be saying if he were here. Just a couple of days ago, I was in Memphis. And 56 years ago, on April 4th, just a few days ago, Dad was killed. And that was a challenging opportunity for me to stand there where he was killed and speak. And a lot was going through my mind. Like, I was 10 years old at the time. So Dad didn't get to see me graduate. Dad didn't get to see me graduate from his alma mater, Morehouse College. Dad didn't get to see me married to my wife, Andrea, and his beautiful granddaughter, Yolanda Renee. So our nation lost, well, I first and foremost, most traumatically lost a dad and my siblings. My mom lost her husband. Interestingly enough, April 4th was a Thursday in 1968, and it was a Thursday in 2024 at 6:01 Central Standard Time. On April 8th, which was a Monday, my mother took the three older ones of us, my late sister Yolanda and my late brother Dexter. The three older ones went to Memphis with her, where she led that demonstration that Dad was to have led. On April 9th, we buried Dad. So to think about the courage that she personified. No one had been captured for Dad's murder. And just for the record, even though this is not something that I'm just going to say it just because the older you get, you stop restricting what you're going to say. But I operate in truth because I firmly believe that ye shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free. But all the drama around James Earl Ray had nothing, maybe very little to do with Dad's assassination, although mainstream media continues to run that lie. That bothers me because that was my dad. So if you're going to say something, say the truth. And that's just not true. We are a potentially great nation. I say that for a lot of different reasons now. And we can handle the truth. We're not going to crumble up and go away. We're not going to lose faith in our government because we've told the truth. The truth is something that helps you to heal as a nation. You can't heal with lies or untruths. So I was thinking about all that and thinking about how Mom had this courage to lead. And I was thinking about where we would be today. Well, here's what I'll say. We would be on a totally different trajectory. Most of the issues we're dealing with, or many of them, would be resolved. We may have new issues that we were dealing with now, but had Dad lived, and Robert Kennedy, and many others, our nation would be in a different place. So history, in a sense, sometimes repeats itself. And a people that do not know their history are doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. So how did we get to a point where we're excluding history now, how we're excluding people. Now, what I mean by that is we're banning books. I thought we were a democracy. I thought we were free. I thought we were able to engage. But if you don't know history, then you really don't know how to correct mistakes that you made. You see, it's not about collective guilt, as my wife often says, but it's about collective responsibility. And we've got to learn and know the true history of all of the people of our nation, starting with the indigenous population, who we exclude and mistreat every day. Those we call Native Americans. We just kind of don't even think about that. But every ethnic group in our nation has brought us to this place where we really do believe we're great. Now, we're great in one sense, but we really haven't become the nation that we can become and that we ought to become. Dad and Mom talked about it takes a few good human beings to bring about change. They demonstrated and left a model, using nonviolence as a means to an end. And yet, we just haven't learned that yet. So every opportunity I have, I want to use my platform to create the climate for good, justice, and righteousness for all human beings, and certainly generations yet unborn. We have AI now that we should all be very concerned about. There's going to be an incredible aspect for it, but there also is a very challenging aspect. Don't know yet how that's going to unfold. None of us do. But the fact of the matter is, there can be more good and should be than bad. It's almost like with technology. It's wonderful to have a smartphone or a device that we can access any amount of information on. But our children at 5 and 6 and 7 years old are actually inundated with information that they probably don't need at that time. More suicides, more hate, more all kinds of things. And when I read some years back about all those who create the technology, they don't have that in their homes for their children until they're adults. But many of our children, we just, I need to make sure I can stay in touch with you, so I'm gonna give you a phone. Well, give them the flip phone. That probably will work. They won't be as, I don't want to say perverted, but they won't be in the shape that a lot of our children are in. So that brings in mental health challenges, that brings in competitiveness. There's nothing wrong, we should compete. But we must compete in a constructive and instructive way, not a destructive way. That is not sustainable. Just as where we are right now in our political space, if we don't make some changes, it's not going to be sustainable. What I know, peace and love and forgiveness and inclusion, those are the kind of things that are sustainable. Dad showed us that model. Mom continued with that model. And many of us are working to create that climate. And so, my intent, Professor Sabato, is to congratulate you and your team and thank you for what you've done in our nation, which probably reverberates potentially around the world, and to say I am so honored to now be a part, a very, very small part, of what's going to happen in the future, along with Professor Liz Cheney and so many others. We can create a better world. I think we must. We have no choice. But then we got a little work to do. Now, my dad used to say in life you can be like a thermometer or a thermostat. And if you look at that analogy, a thermometer is an incredible device. It basically, though, just records the temperature. 70 or 80, it'll say that. If it's 30, it'll say 30. But there's another device called a thermostat. And if it's too hot, you turn it down. If it's too cold, you turn it up. It sort of regulates the temperature. And we have to decide in life whether we're going to just record what happens, to go along to get along, or if we're going to be a part of the process of regulating what we want for ourselves, our families, our children, and generations yet unborn. That's something to think about. Dad said, and I really am closing. You know, preachers have like 3 or 4 things they say as they're closing, and they keep saying, and I'm getting ready to go now. But Dad said, in life, we must find out what our calling is. And when we find that calling, we must do our jobs well. Do those jobs so well that the living, the dead, or the unborn could do those jobs no better. In life, if it falls your lot to be a street sweeper, he said, go on and sweep streets like Michelangelo carved marble. Sweep streets like Beethoven composed music. Sweep streets like Shakespeare wrote poetry. Sweep streets like Raphael painted pictures. Sweep streets so well that all the heavens and earth would have to pause and say, here lived a great street sweeper that did their job well. Our challenge is to find out, even no matter what age we are. I'm 66. I'm still working to find out fully what my calling is and trying to do the best that I can to create a better world for our daughter and generations yet unborn. Now, I was very fortunate to travel with my mom a lot, much more than Dad. I think Dexter and I traveled with Dad. I traveled probably 8 or 10 times. But I traveled many, many times with Mom. And I went to an undergraduate institution, which is called Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio. And there was something on that campus that inspired me. I probably went 4 or 5 times. But when I first went at 14 or so and saw the statue of the educator Horace Mann, there was an inscription under that statue that profoundly impacted me, which said, be ashamed to die until you've won a victory for humanity. The first time I saw that, I said, oh my God, that's overwhelming. I came back again, saw it a second time, analyzed it a little more. Third time again, and then probably by the 4th time, I would have probably been in my 20s then. I said, well, how do you do that? And how do you break that down? And what I came to was, this is what it really meant. You see, we can win a victory in our neighborhood. We can win a victory maybe in our schools. We can win victories in our places of worship. Some of us may win victories in our cities, some in our states. Some may win victories in our nation, and some may win victories in our world. All those words mean are, be ashamed to die until you've done a little something to make the world in which we all must live a little better than it was when you arrived. Thank you so much, and may God bless each of you always.
Now that was a speech. You see why we're so happy to have Professor King associated with the Center for Politics and the University of Virginia. And we look forward to many times with him here and many sessions for students who will really learn from what he has to say. I told him that slogan at Antioch, the phrase uttered by Horace Mann, influenced me too. I came across that many years ago, and I've cited it many times. So made me read more about Horace Mann. In any event, you said you were a small part of this. You just proved you're a big part, and we're so glad you're here. Now, it's a tough act to follow, but as you said, this is a terrific panel. It's a bunch of superstars, and Alex Theodoridis, where is he? Oh, they're always right in front of me. And I can't say, it's getting worse and worse. You remember the way I was years ago. It's getting worse. He put together a panel that I'm looking forward to hearing. Now, they must tell us, Chuck Todd, they must tell us who's going to win. I don't want any pussyfooting around. Okay? When you're going to tell us outright. And by the way, congratulations for what you did on Meet the Press the other day. We all noticed. We appreciated it. I'm going to let Alex introduce the members because he insisted on doing that. And we worked together for years, and he did a wonderful job for the center in those first few years, as Ken Stroop, his successor, does now. There's Ken over there. He does an incredible job. Glenn Crossman and others. I don't know what we do without him. But he knows me well enough to realize that sometimes I don't get it exactly right in the introduction, or I mix up facts. I mean, who cares? Facts don't matter anymore. We live in the post-factual era, so who cares, right? But so he did something very unusual that no one has ever done before. He wrote his own introduction and sent it to me and insisted that I read it. And I'm going to, and I'm going to pause at several moments so you can remember I didn't write this. He wrote this about himself. It was somewhat in jest, but not really. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to skip that first part. He did launch the Center for Politics with me when he was a fourth-year undergraduate. He was way ahead of his time, but so were his parents. For 6 years, he was our chief of staff, and he wrote this part. He was my chief of staff, my right-hand man, the Robin to my Batman, the Hamilton to my George Washington. It gets worse. I better. His work at the center was the peak of his career. He peaked early. It was a pinnacle. But at least on paper, he's done other outstanding things. He left the center to earn a master's degree in public policy at some little place. Is it Harvard? Is that how you pronounce it? Harvard, up there, somewhere in the north. He went on to earn a PhD in political science at UC Berkeley. Today, he's an associate professor of political science at UMass Amherst and co-director of the UMass poll, which is a terrific poll. You can believe what's in there methodologically. It's very sound, and I recommend it to you. And that's Alex when you see it. And they're interesting questions. They're questions other pollsters don't really ask. He's quickly established himself as one of the leading scholars, according to Alex, on American electoral politics and partisan polarization, producing the first research on partisan dehumanization. I like that, partisan dehumanization, and the definitive studies on the deep, visceral nature of party identity and the ways in which polarization divides America, even beyond politics, which is absolutely true. And through his work with the UMass poll and the media, Alex is a decidedly public-facing scholar, which all scholars should be. We shouldn't just be about our research and publishing obscure articles in journals, as useful as they can be sometimes, or even just sharing with our students, as important as they are. We should speak to the broader public. Maybe they won't like what we say, but it's our responsibility to speak to them. And Alex does that already, and you'll be seeing him for decade after decade in the future. Some of you will be. Some of you are my age. Forget about it. Now comes the final sentence and the most important, the most important. Alex Theodoridis is doing the most important work on politics by a Greek guy since Aristotle. Seriously and honestly and sincerely, thank you, Alex. You've done a lot for this center and for the university, and you're doing a lot for politics. We salute you, and we love your panel, and we are going to listen carefully to everything they say. Come on up here, Alex.
25 years have passed, and Larry's still blowing the laugh lines I wrote for him. No, thank you, Larry. That was just perfectly effusive, not too over the top, but just right. I'm going to get right to the panel because we have a fantastic panel here. Do you guys want to just come on up? I'm going to introduce each one of you very briefly, but just come on up and sit down in whatever order. This panel is a murderer's row, which is a reference that only our two presidential candidates are old enough to appreciate. And I am very excited to hear what they all have to say. Or do you want me sitting down? I'm gonna stand. Can I just use this? Yeah. Great. All right, so over there we've got,
Make Larry sit here.
yeah, just to listen to everything. To everybody's left, although that's not actually true, I think, we have Paul Begala, unapologetic Texas Longhorn, even when he's here at the university. We call it the university here. Obviously, one of the most famous political consultants ever. You know, if you're like me and you were a big fan of the War Room and still assign it to your students, you saw his some of his early handiwork. And his remarkable commentary on CNN is just fantastic. Next to him, we have a UVA alum, Jamel Bowie, New York Times columnist, one of the most important voices on all sorts of things related to politics, but especially race and politics, at the New York Times, formerly with Slate, often on Face the Nation, which I think is that's the most important Sunday show, right? Is that right? No? If it's, yeah.
There's no good answer I can give to that.
I think, don't people say if it's Sunday, it's Face the Nation? So I'm gonna rib Chuck a lot. Chuck and I go way back. Most importantly, though, Jamel Bowie is apparently an expert on breakfast cereal, and I want to, not during the panel, but I want to hear about that because I love breakfast cereal. Donna Edwards over here. I'm going in alphabetical order. I'll go in stage order. Sarah Longwell. Sarah Longwell, right in the middle, as she sort of, you know, I guess you're not really in the middle politically, but leading GOP operative for over 20 years. She was the first female board member of the Log Cabin Republicans. She is one of the most important Never Trump Republicans out there, publisher of The Bulwark. She's really played a very important role in hopefully redirecting the Republican Party in a way that's sustainable, as you said. Publisher of The Bulwark, which is fantastic if you haven't checked it out, and what you really need to check out, because it's see listening for me is her podcast. She does focus groups all over the place with all sorts of voters and turns it into a podcast. And it's fantastic if you want to sort of get in the heads of what people are thinking in American politics today. So really check that out. Chuck Todd, my old friend. Chuck, yeah. Chuck is perhaps best known as the guy from the hotline who helped me organize some of the first conferences that the Center for Politics put on. We joined. That's right. Well, you know, it's a funny story. It's politics is why we called it the Center for Governmental Studies. We were trying to get money from the legislature, and one of the key figures there said people hate politics. So to show how much we cared about that, we changed the name to Center for Governmental Studies. And as soon as he was no longer important, we changed it right back to the Center for Politics. So, yeah, he's no longer with us. As strangely, Larry, are most of the people who were important back then, or a lot of them. Yeah, it's crazy. We haven't aged. I don't know why. So we used to, yes, Chuck was really on the ground floor in terms of the national profile of the Center for Politics. He was second in command at that point at the hotline, which was must-read reading for anybody in politics at that point. And we teamed up with them to organize the first American Democracy conferences starting in 98, 99. And so I've known Chuck since then, and he's gone on to do some important things. He's done pretty much everything you can do in political journalism, in the political media. He was editor of the Hotline after that, White House correspondent, host of Meet the Press, as you all know, did a fantastic job there. And apparently, if you hang the toilet paper in your house the wrong way, Chuck will fix it for you if he visits your house and goes to the bathroom. So it's a very strange.
It's a Tony Kornheiser reference, and
Yeah.
if you have to have it explained,
Apparently,
you don't need to know anymore. Enough.
Apparently, the right way to hang toilet paper in your house is with the paper hanging from underneath. Of
course it is.
Underneath.
Most people know
Yes,
this.
it is.
Most
Apparently,
people
that's
know this. It has been nothing but the toilet paper lobby wants you to do it over so that you overuse toilet paper and buy more. It's obvious. I
more
will tell you,
politics. More
My
politics.
father was convinced of this. For
Yeah, is there a
decades,
middle
and
way,
he-
Tom?
There's
Is there
no
a middle way? No.
There is no
Okay.
middle. Well, you
all
can
right,
put it
and
this
Donna
way.
Edwards, last but absolutely not least.
Really
represent-
wanted to follow the toilet paper rule.
Yeah. Donna Edwards.
She's the one that actually gets elected to office.
Yeah,
Can you
yeah.
tell?
Represented Maryland's 4th District for nearly a decade. She's a trenchant voice on politics and policy. You can see her all over the place. She's on MSNBC a lot, and she has logged a ton of miles in her RV called Lucille, which I just learned. I assumed it was a B.B. King reference, Lucille Ball reference. So another reference that our presidential candidates would appreciate. All right, I'm going to get right to the questions. I have some slides I wanted to put up. I wanted this to be a data-driven panel. Do you guys have them? There we go. All right, go to the next one. All right, so I sent you guys this. It's probably hard for you to see. This is one of our UMass poll results from January. We asked people, what emotions will you feel if Trump wins? What emotions will you feel if Biden wins? And what I want to highlight here is that these are positive emotions at the top if your own side wins. Down here, covered by the panel, negative emotions if the other side wins. And what you'll see if you look at all those bars is that Republicans and Democrats are extremely close in terms of negative emotions they will feel if the other side wins. But positive emotions, huge emotions gap, enthusiasm gap for Republicans on each and every one, except for relief, which is that even really a positive emotion, right? So big gap. Democrats are not, saying they're going to be thrilled. They're going to be relieved or upset if the other guy wins. So my question for the panel why do you think this is, number one? And is there anything they can do about it? Now, I will add that in political science research, we've found that negative emotions are more motivating, but this has to be troubling. So I'm going to start with Donna over here.
So I look at this as pretty consistent with Democrats' constant hand wringing, eyebrow furrowing, bedwetting, all the rest. I mean, I really do think that sometimes as Democrats, we do tend to see the glass as half empty and not half full. But I also think that those are things that motivate us to participate. And so I don't really look at that as a negative. But I think it's fairly consistent with the way that Democrats have always behaved.
So it's just disposition.
Look, this is just negative polarization. I mean, that has been motivating us. It wasn't that long ago, 2008, at the end of the campaign, the country had a net positive feeling towards both presidential candidates, and it's the last time. I think Obama was 1-1 when he won re-election in 12, and I think Romney was just underwater. But I could tell you now, those numbers today would look positive in comparison. So I think this is really just a reflection of, sometimes this stuff's a lot simpler than we make it out to be. You campaign negatively. You campaign by saying the other side's an existential threat to your way of life, and you're going to get results like this. To me, it's just Now, it's a longer discussion of how do we get a campaign that doesn't create this, but I think this is a response. This is, to me, a very rational response by the voters based on the campaign they're experiencing, based on the conversation they've experienced in the last decade.
Yeah, I would just add to that look, in 2020, Joe Biden was a compromise candidate for Democrats who were like, who do we think can beat Donald Trump? That's all we care about, beating Donald Trump. And we'll take Joe Biden because we think maybe he's the guy, that he won't make anybody too mad. And then they were like, and he'll be a one-term president because he's very old. And then now he's 4 years older and he's going again. And Democrats are unhappy about that. And they're unhappy that Trump is the candidate again. But the reason there's the asymmetry in the fact that like Joe Biden doesn't have much on the positive side and Trump does is that Trump he's taken over the base of the Republican Party, and the Republican Party, that base is large enough to win most primaries, which he is doing. And so he does have an enthusiastic base. But to go to the negative polarization just really quickly, this election is actually going to be decided by people who hate both candidates, which is like as negative as it gets. Call them the double haters, the double doubters, the epochs on both their housers. That is who is going to decide this election. So it makes a ton of sense that they feel that way.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to the points made. I'll just make the observation that part of what's difficult, I think, about looking at this sort of evidence, this sort of information, and trying to draw any kind of broader conclusion is that, and I'm very much of the belief there's very little that's actually new in American politics, but this year is quite new, right? Like we have not seen in the modern era this kind of rematch between a former president and an incumbent president who was once the challenger. And it's not as if these are two figures whose time on sort of the national political and cultural stage has been relatively short, right? Like these are two people who have been in the public mind in one way or another I'm 36 years old, so quite literally my entire life, right? When I was born, Joe Biden was well into his Senate career. And Donald Trump was well into his career as a celebrity real estate guy. And so it's sort of unusual circumstance that we have this rematch, unusual circumstance in which everyone knows everything about everyone. There's no new information really to put out there. And people feel one way or another about it, but I'm not really sure how much it matters for the outcome because it's not anything that is, I think, going to be shaping or persuading anyone one way or another.
Yeah, actually, first, Larry, thank you for what you're doing. and thank you for having us, and thank you for educating my son, Charlie. I wasn't smart enough to get into UVA, but my son was, and he's a pollster working in D.C. now for Garen Yang. A brilliant kid because of Larry. I also personally, Alex said I'm a renowned political consultant. When I was an unknown political consultant, I was 30 years old running Harris Wofford's campaign. Harris had worked for Dr. King. I got a call from Martin and said, I know Harris Wofford. I think y'all need some help. He came to Pennsylvania and campaigned for Harris. We were 47 points behind. Nobody with a lick of sense was helping us. And Martin came and helped, and I really can't thank you enough. I want to thank you publicly for helping making Harris a senator. It was remarkable. So thank you. Nothing unites the people of Earth like a threat from Mars. Okay? That's what unites they're not even the Democrats anymore. I mean, Sarah's research has taught me that there is a pro-Trump coalition and an anti-Trump coalition. So, of course, the anti-Trump coalition is more negative. I don't have a problem with that. I just want their votes. Only one of my four, one went to UVA, none went one went to University of Texas. The only veto I got was that they couldn't go to Oklahoma or A&M. Why? You ask any of my kids, including Charlie, who's a brilliant UVA man, what time is it? You call him right now, Larry. I said, Charlie, what time is it? He'll say, Larry, it's 1:46 and OU sucks. That's how they tell time. In opposition, it's science, okay? Oklahoma sucks. In our will, in my will, my wife is here, she'll tell you, it is written in my will that if any of the children go to A&M, they get not a dime. Not an effing dime. So I embrace that kind of opposition. It's highly motivational. I like it.
All right, I have a couple of VIPs who are going to ask questions who are center alums. Where's Dave? Dave, where are you at? Come on up here. We got a mic for you. Dave Wasserman, everybody. Dave Wasserman is you know him from the Cook Political Report. I know him as an intern at the center who we used almost as like a parlor trick where you could ask him any congressional district and he would tell you who had run there the last like 6 or 7 elections and what the percentages were, et cetera. Go ahead.
Thanks, Alex. And it's good to see everyone. I overlapped a little bit with Jamel. So my question is this. The Biden campaign came out with an ad targeting Nikki Haley voters. But what the data appears to be telling us is that there are even more young Black and Hispanic voters who are feeling cross-pressured, or unmotivated, or who are up for grabs. How would you evaluate the Biden campaign's efforts and paid communication so far to try and get back to his 2020 levels of support with those voters? And how would you evaluate the Trump campaign's efforts so far to try and attract those voters?
So let's I want to hear from you guys and Donna on this. Who wants to go first?
Well, first, I was making fun of the first. That's not a laughing matter. I mean, Wasserman raises it because he's brilliant, and it's a huge it's a crisis for the Democratic Party. When you start seeing much more than erosion, collapse with younger voters and Black voters, and you're the Democrat, it's a 5-alarm fire. Now, the good news if you're a Democrat is Biden is on this. He's not only running ads targeting Haley voters, he's already launched the largest advertising targeting Black voters in American political history. He's doing it 210 days before the election, not just 72 hours like some Democrats used to do. I'm glad that he's dialed in on it, focused on it. He has a terrible problem with his base. Trump has no problem with his base. They have like neck tattoos to say "Make America Great Again," Grate. Okay, but their heart's in the right place.
They're doing that for me at least.
They have mirror image problems. Biden needs help with his base, but is doing very well with swing voters. Trump needs no help with his base, but doesn't seem to want swing voters. He's just alienating. So I guess I'd still rather have Joe's problems than Donald's, but it's a serious problem. It's a terrible problem for the Democratic Party.
I don't think I have any, observations about the Biden campaign's outreach here. To me, so much of this seems we're still in the early stages of a national campaign, and still at the point where voters are really just expressing their discontent with Biden and not so much making comparisons with the other candidate. If it's September and things look like this, then yes, obviously Democrats have a lot of problems. But in April, I think that there is still plenty of time to recover. I'm going to make a quick observation about what might be the source of this. Some of it's very contingent, right? It's very clear that the Biden has been hurt by his administration's commitment to arms shipments to the Israeli government. That's been a major weakness with him for young voters and for voters of color. But I think there's something happening more broad that's not as contingent, and that is it's one of the effects of declining religious attendance among Americans, and that includes Black Americans. So one of the interesting findings in thinking about the relationship between religious attendance and politics is that for white voters, regular religious attendance translates to conservative politics for, I think, pretty straightforward and obvious reasons. For Black voters, regular religious attendance translates to stronger Democratic Party identification for reasons that have a lot to do with the way that African American churches serve as like a political acculturation function for Black voters. Black church attendance overall is still pretty high, but among younger Black voters, young Black Americans, church attendance is dropping steadily, and especially among young Black men. And there's kind of once you set the facts about church attendance and politics and race and all these things, the conclusion's actually really straightforward, right? If younger Black men are not really going to church anymore, they're not really connected to that anymore, they're not really being acculturated as like Democratic voters in the same way as their parents might have been or their grandparents might have been, they're going to have weaker partisan attachments, and that doesn't mean they become Republicans, but it does mean that they are a little swingier, they're a little more receptive to messages from Republicans, especially messages like Trump's that focus a lot on entrepreneurship, on sort of what I would call, patriarchal masculinity. I can take care of a family. I have multiple wives. I can take care of a family. I have a lot of money. No one can tell me what to do. Is a really powerful message for working class men and working class men of color, I think in particular. And all that there's a weaker countervailing force to basically sort of like smack someone upside the head and say, get your sense in order. So I think that's separate and apart from this election. If we're just like looking at the next 10 years, I think that's something really to observe. Like, how does changing church attendance shape Black voters? How does rising numbers of Latino evangelicals shape voting behavior among Hispanics? Because the evangelical churches serve this political acculturation factor in a really powerful way for conservative candidates. So yeah, that's
Donna, what have you and Lucille been finding?
I don't know. I don't know what to add to that except to say that I think it is true that the Biden campaign has started now earlier and deeper, reaching into Black communities. I do think that they have been late to the game. Some of what has happened, especially with young Black men, didn't start now. It started back in 2015, where and you could see some of the results in the 2016 election where there was a little bit of seepage, and then into 2020 among young Black men, I think for the reasons that Jamel indicated. Does that mean it's not recoverable? No, it doesn't at all. I do think that we're at the point in the campaign right now where finally, the decision has been made. We have two nominees. There's an opportunity to contrast where there wasn't before. I think that some of the messaging that has been coming from, at least as I've heard, a couple of Biden surrogates, sort of dismissing young people and Black voters, saying they'll come home, that Black voters and young people are about style, not substance, feels like it's talking down to voters, and so they have to be very careful about that. And I'm not as worried about Black voters and young people showing up to vote for Donald Trump. I'm more worried that they're not going to show up. And so I think the goal of the Biden campaign has to be to hit these communities over and over and over again and make them feel like they're part of the tent. And I think especially for young Black men, and I don't claim to know anything about Black men, that's for sure. I've raised a young black man, so I know a little bit of something. But what I can say is that I think that from their lens, they're having a hard time wrapping their heads around what the administration and what the president has done for them personally. And so I think that Biden has to do a lot more to show that demonstrably to make sure that these folks don't just come home, but that they show up to vote.
Can I just say really quickly, just as a broad framing matter, though, if you went to Sarah Longwell 10 years ago, and I'm 34, and you showed me the people that are in this race, Donald Trump, a limousine liberal from New York, who was like a weird game show host on a show I never watched, but a big celebrity, Joe Biden, lifelong Democrat, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., big environmentalist. I would be like, cool, you've got 3 Democrats in the race. 0 Republicans. Show me the Republican in this race. And now you have Donald Trump as the Republican in the race. RFK Jr. is the guy outflanking him from the right is not the right word to use because we're not existing on a linear plane like that anymore, but on the anti-vax side. And Joe Biden's the normal Democrat. And so the entire political landscape has been entirely scrambled. But if you are somebody who is just coming of political consciousness, you're in your mid-20s, late 20s, Donald Trump has been the Republican Party now for a decade. And he throws big parties and is more fun than the boring, really, really old white guy. They're both really old. Everybody acts like that's the same, though. Nobody thinks it's the same. When I do focus groups with Black and Latino voters, young progressive voters, they say a bunch of things that would just blow people's minds in the room. Like, they don't see any difference between Joe Biden and Donald Trump is a thing that you hear because Joe Biden commits genocide and Donald Trump's a terrible person, so they hate them both. Or there's a lot of, like, I think you said this, I hear from a lot of young black men that they think that Donald Trump's entrepreneurial, him as a businessman, like that's exciting and more interesting to them than Joe Biden. And it's not really a political or tribal affiliation. It's like what they find interesting and attractive in politics.
I just want to add 2 things to what Jamel was saying, because I think it's long-term trends here that again, this election sometimes blinds us from the bigger stuff. I think this movement against religion, it's a growing, right? The fastest growing movement in among people is non-believers, right? The nuns. I think we're into the 30s now at that point. I have a bet with my old EP that by the end of this century, those people that believe in religion will be closer to being under 20% of the population. Now we're going to go through, and the reason I bring this up is we're in the middle of a realignment. And we keep holding elections in the middle of a realignment and keep saying, this is what it is, when things continue to move, right? We just happen to hold elections at a fixed date, and then we think this is it. But we're in multiple realignments. We've been in this religious realignment for some time. And I am very curious what's going to happen to religious African Americans over the next generation. Do you see that shifting, that if you believe in an organized religion, you're going to end up gravitating to one party because only one party is going to be the party of religion and the other party will be a more secular party. If you want to look at a sampling of what this looks like, you can go to Israel, right, where you have very secular politics on one hand, then you have very religious affiliated parties. So that's just one long-term observation here that I just think and we also are in the middle of a socioeconomic realignment. If Donald Trump wasn't as outwardly racist, I think some of this movement might have happened a lot sooner among men and women of color. So I think some of this in some ways is, and if you look, by the way, we also forget the Barack Obama outlier. If you look at where black men were in 2004, and you look at where black men seem to be leaning today, it looks more similar than different. And Obama got a lot, basically, Republican-leaning black men to support him, I think, for 2 terms. And I think you do have a cohort, because, again, George Bush got 14% of the black vote in Ohio in 2004. It's one of the reasons he carried Ohio. I think he got 20% of black men in Ohio. So, this is, in some ways, sometimes we get blinded by the immediacy of what we're dealing with. some of this was sort of there, and Obama, I think with African American voters, might have been a bit of an outlier, particularly with black men, but that's something I don't think we'll know for sure. Like anything, we'll get the answer in about another decade or so when we get more data.
I teach causal inference to our grad students, so I like that you're minding the counterfactual. You always got to consider the counterfactual. I also like that you have a bet about something at the end.
I'll
of
be
the
dead. Our
century.
kids are going to.
I like that. That's
we'll leave it in our wills. Our kids will decide.
This is actually a very good segue to another question that we have from a Center for Politics and UVA alum who has gone on to do fantastic things in the world of real politics. Adam Ambrogi heads up external affairs at the League of Women Voters.
Thanks, everybody. So in 2022, the League got together at its biannual convention, 3,000 lifelong women's voting advocates, rights advocates. And on that June day, at around 11 o'clock, the Dobbs decision came down. And I was one of 10 men in a room of 3,000 women that went through the stages of grief, anger, and then resilience as they bought up all the bullhorns in the Denver metro area, canceled the plenary for the afternoon, and went to show their displeasure with that position at the Denver State Capitol. There's a lot of anger and a lot of connection between the rights of women's bodily autonomy and the connection to civic life and civic power and voice. And we're hearing that from our members all around the country. What's the role of Dobbs? What does it play? How does this decision play out in this election? And where are some unique things that we may see it occur, especially related to the Electoral College, state by state in the battleground states? Thank you.
Let's start with Donna.
Why do you do that?
Trying to mix it up.
No, look, I think that Dobbs is still a really powerful motivator for voters, and it isn't, and where I think, we could see some additional movement is with young men who also who really embrace women's reproductive freedom. And so, I mean, if you go from 2018 to 2020 to 2022 to this year, we still see that Dobbs is a motivator. And I think, sometimes, when you lose, you go back and you reevaluate and you say, how do we need to kind of modify our position? And in some ways, so many Republican candidates and electeds are actually digging in. And that is proving, I think, and will prove for 2024, a real disaster where there will be voters who show up and they're showing up to vote on women's reproductive freedom. And the question, I've been hearing the Biden campaign has been trying to characterize this broadly as freedom so that you're linking in reproductive freedom and democracy and stuff. I'm not really sure that works. It doesn't really work for me because I think that reproductive freedom standing on its own is a motivator, and that Democrats need to take advantage of the clear difference between where most Republican electeds are and where most voters are.
I just want to second what Donna said. It is amazing to me how many, and this is mostly Democratic male political strategists, sorry, Paul, that have always believed in this idea that, you gotta play down the abortion issue. I remember I had Bernie Sanders on Meet the Press 3 weeks before Election Day 2022. Democrats need a better economic message. It's like, maybe they don't. I always put all things.
Chuck and I are Jewish, so he can do that.
I put all things off. Are you a Greek Jew?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
My
interesting.
my mother's maiden name was Hyman.
That's quite the Mediterranean. You really embrace the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
I like it.
You all don't have to.
I
push
love
me
pita.
too.
I love pita.
Yes, well, there you go.
You can tell.
Just always get the right answer about where you get your best shawarmas. See, there we go. I'm going to get in trouble.
Okay.
No answer. But I think it's possible that, for instance, the 2022 midterms, and I always put this off to political science professors of 20 years from now who will look back, but I know that we in the near term said it was all Trump's fault, what happened to Republicans. I think 20 years from now we'll always say it was Dobbs. And I think until, it's very possible Republicans don't win another national election until abortion rights is codified by Congress. I assume by 2030. I think at some point there'll be enough Republicans that cry uncle. There'll be 60 votes in the Senate. This will happen, but it may take probably 2 or 3 mule kicks to the head of the elephant for them to do this. But it's very possible that it's the only issue that matters to deciding what our turnout looks like and which way things go for the rest of this decade.
Ooh, guys, I got some tough news for you, which is that American voters do not think that Donald Trump is a huge pro-life advocate. They think he's maybe paid for some abortions in his life, right? And so I'm worried for Democrats who think that this is going to save them in 2024. So I think that there is a way to use, I agree with you about 2022, like 65%. I actually think what happened in 2022, which was Trump's fault in the sense that because he controls the base, and the base is quite large, he was able to push through a bunch of primary nominees who were, like he is often, anathema to these swing voters. And so when I listen to voters in 2022 talk about why they didn't want to vote for, say, Blake Masters, they would say things like, well, he's crazy on abortion, he thinks the election was stolen, and he, like, is friends with the Unabomber, or he likes the Unabomber.
He looks like a school shooter.
Yeah, right? I mean, like, they thought, just think about the people that were there in 2022. It's like Herschel Walker and Carrie Lake. Like, these people, it wasn't that voters were like, Dobbs. It was like, Dobbs was a way for them an entry point into being like, this person is crazy and outside the mainstream. Now, the reason that this issue works for Democrats now is because they can be on offense on it because it is no longer the law of the land. The reason that Bernie Sanders, it's different now is because, like, the Republicans are the dog that caught the car, right? So Democrats can be on offense about this because it's a right that's been taken away. People hate it when their rights get taken away, but it's a problem if you don't think that Donald Trump is sort of crazy on abortion. Like, nobody thinks he's like Mike Pence. And so what Democrats are going to have to do to harness this issue is put it on ballot initiatives in as many places as possible, because one of the things Biden's going to need on this question of young people, Hispanics, Black, he's going to need some reverse coattails, right? Democrats down ballot are going to have to figure out how to get people out in local elections and on issues that people care about that matter, that help Biden up ticket.
I don't have that much to add to that. I think that's exactly right. For Dobbs to, I think, pay real dividends politically for Democrats this year, they're going to have to link it to Donald Trump. They're going to really have to show voters, remind voters that Donald Trump was the president who appointed the 3 Supreme Court justices who made Dobbs possible. And given the Supreme Court's declining popularity, it might even make more sense to try to connect the Supreme Court directly to Trump.
100%.
That you just have to have overlapping and reinforcing messages, sort of saying, if you a vote for Trump is a vote for people you don't like on the Supreme Court, is a vote for more abortion restrictions. You gotta overlap it. I also agree with Chuck's point that abortion politics, abortion rights might be like the only issue that matters, in part because the Democratic Party right now is this impossibly broad coalition of voters who have a wide variety of different concerns. You have progressives who sort of want kind of like a more social democratic America. You have, like centrist suburbanites who just want things to seem normal. You have some form of Republicans. You have so many people under this one tent, and you need an issue that can keep everyone on the same page, at least for an election cycle. I'm almost hesitant to make this kind of analogy because it was a very difficult decade for the country, to put it lightly, but it feels quite a bit like the function that anti-slavery played for partisan politics in the 1850s, right? That the thing about the Republican Party in its first iteration is that it wasn't a uniform ideological coalition. It was a bunch of different groups of Americans who all didn't want slavery to expand for a variety of different reasons. Free Soilers were like, we don't really care about black people, but we don't like slavery. unionist Democrats who are like, we don't really care that much about slavery, or certainly not black people, but we really want the Union to stick together, abolitionists, like a wide variety of people. And anti-slavery was able to keep them all together. And I think abortion is going to play that role for the Democratic Party, at least for the next few election cycles. It will be the issue that can keep all of these disparate groups together, at least to win an election. Again, the analogy is difficult because the 1850s didn't end well, but I think it works for our purposes.
Yeah, if possible, we've all been understating the effect of Dobbs. It's the single biggest political earthquake since 9/11. It's only two I've seen in my career, changing absolutely everything. And what it changed is, as Chuck said, my old boss Bill Clinton used to say abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. Why? I'm sure he believes that, but
Booed if he said that right now in front of a Democratic audience. Yeah.
why? Because of Dobbs. Because they took away a right. So people who were theoretical pro-lifers are now operational pro-choicers. Okay, I have a buddy named Jim. He's a brilliant lawyer and kind of a redneck, and we go quail hunting together. And he's got two daughters in their 20s. And he said, well, hell, I'm pro-life. I said, really, Jim, you are? He said, well, the standard three exceptions, rape, incest, and if my daughter gets in trouble. By God. And he's become the most pro-choice guy in the world. And I think it's when the decision came down, as an old white Irish Catholic, I called Cecile Richards, who I've been friends with since her mama was my county commissioner. And I said, what do I need to know about this? She ran Planned Parenthood for more than a decade. She said 5 words: this won't age well. I said, what do you mean? She said, Paul, every single day, this young woman in Oklahoma was sent out to her truck to bleed out. This woman in Texas who sat with the First Lady at the State of the Union had to leave her state. In January, so that's a long time ago now, January, the Journal of the American Medical Association issued a study. It said in the 14 states that passed the most restrictive abortion laws after Dobbs, 64,565 women have become pregnant by rape and unable to terminate those pregnancies in their home state. 64,565 as of January. This will not age well. They didn't stop counting in January. They didn't stop happening, rather. They just stopped counting. So I think it's cataclysmic. I think people like me can't even wrap our minds around how big this is.
Well, and to put a pin on it, I think that what happened also is that there were many in the pro-choice movement activists who had predicted that it would go from anti-abortion to other kinds of reproductive health, IVF, birth control. And indeed, that is exactly what's happening. And I think that for the pro-life movement, they had not anticipated that it would do a deep dive from anti-abortion all the way to IVF. And so I think that changes the dynamic entirely.
But Democrats have to prosecute this case. This is my point that I'm trying to. So when I do a focus group and I ask people, hey, how do you think things are going in the country, or what do you care about? They bring up the economy, they bring up immigration, they bring up crime. They do not bring up abortion very often. But if we bring up abortion, if we introduce it into the conversation, everybody gets really animated. Everybody cares very deeply, which means you have to raise the salience of the issue. You have to establish the threat for people. You have to tie it to Donald Trump's promoting the pushing the Supreme Court justices. And my concern is that you can't just say, this is cataclysmic, I'm like that, and this just changes everything. You're gonna have to prosecute the case actively in order to make this one stick, because there's a lot of other issues in this election that can go the other way if you're not talking about it a lot.
Well, I think that's why you see the very latest ad campaign by the Biden campaign is Trump, in his own words, taking credit for the Supreme Court. I think you've got to run that over and over and over again to, as you say, to prosecute the case.
Well, and the much maligned Vice President of the United States has been a star on this. She has stepped up. She's going around to college campuses. She has found her voice. And if you're Joe Biden, I love these people say, well, you should get rid of Kamala. Oh, okay. We already suck with young people and black people. She's young and black. And by the way, she does not like stagger or stumble on this issue. She speaks with great power and passion, and she has been their secret weapon. I think you're going to see a whole lot more of her. I hope we see a whole lot more of her, especially on that issue.
Yeah, not to mention that it used to actually be common to switch vice presidents FDR did it. It's not common anymore, so it would really stand out, right? To switch VP nominees. Can you guys put up the next slide? All right, so I did a survey of former members of Congress with the help of L.F. Payne, who has been involved with the center from the very beginning. He's the president of the Association of Former Members of Congress. Donna is also in the leadership of it, and one day will be president of it. Or at least that's what they're hoping. We did a survey of 300 former members of Congress. Fantastic turnout. A lot of Republicans, not a bunch of rhinos. I can tell you that. I can't tell you who answered, but I can tell you, not a bunch of rhinos. This was not anonymous. All right, so the darker line is what the former members of Congress told us. So these are Republican elites. President Biden's election was legitimate, 82%. That compares with 26% among Republican voters. Percent saying Trump's election claims threaten democracy, 64%, compares to 18%, just 18% among Republican voters in our polling. 72% support law enforcement efforts regarding January 6th participants. Only 29% among Republican voters, and that number is deteriorating actually as Trump makes them heroes or hostages. And then a bunch of other things about describing January 6th as a protest and things like that. So a huge disconnect here, and also a huge disconnect largely between, and I'm coming to you first on this, Sarah, between these former Republican leaders, again, at the highest levels of American politics, and the voters who previously were their voters, and the current elected representatives from the Republican Party. So my question is, Center for Politics professor of practice Liz Cheney famously said to her GOP colleagues, there will come a day when Donald Trump is gone. So let's imagine that day. Whether that, that's not supposed to be, no, that's I mean, that's very crass. Whether he loses this year or just proves mortal, how much of this is Trump and how much is baked into the GOP right now? What's the future of the post-Trump GOP? So this is really going into that crystal ball.
Oh, well, it's easy. I don't need a crystal ball. I just need to listen to voters, which is what I do. And I'm just going to say, when I was, it was like 7 or 8 years ago, right after Trump happened, I was in a room of sad Republicans, which is where I spent all my time after Trump got elected, with lots of sad Republicans. And we were trying to come up with things to do, and I was like, well, we should primary Donald Trump with a real Republican. And so I went running around to like Larry Hogan and Adam Kinzinger, Will Hurd, and all these guys. Come on, you got to run against him. We got to save the Republican Party. And then they were like, okay, well, show me that if I do it, I won't get embarrassed. That I could win, or that it'd be okay, whatever. So I started doing a bunch of polling and focus groups. It was really the first focus groups I did. And I listened to Republican voters, and I went, okay, no, we're not going to win. You're not going to win. You're not going to win, Larry Hogan. I'm sorry. And the Republican Party, and if there's anything you remember from me talking, because I'm the only person up here you've never heard of before, and if you're like, there's that girl I didn't know and I'd never heard of before, she said something, it is this. The Republican
Excuse
Party,
me, they've never heard of me.
Yeah. The Republican Party is not going back to what it was. Okay? The reason, and Chuck just whispered this to me, but it's 100% true. The reason, the key word in all of this is former. Because there's this thing that I call the Republican Triangle of Doom. And it is the toxic and symbiotic relationship between the voters, the right-wing infotainment media, and Trump and other elected officials. And it is working on each other all the time to radicalize. What do you see after January 6th? 70% of Republicans didn't think the election was stolen right after, or even after the 2020 election, right? Or they didn't think that January 6th was okay after January 6th. But what happens? Trump says the election's stolen. The right-wing infotainment media has to pander to his voters, says it's stolen. They gin up. The elected officials, like people who are normal, like Kevin McCarthy, has to be like, oh no, definitely stolen, because I gotta respond to these voters, and I need to be on these right-wing infotainment media systems. And before you know it, you have an incredibly radicalized Republican Party that now, and when I listened to the voters back then, when I was trying to understand what's going on, I just knew, no offense to think tanks and political institutions, but I knew I'd spent too much time at think tanks and not enough time listening to voters, because once you do, you realize the populist, it goes back to my earlier point about all three of them sort of being Democrats in my mind, Donald Trump being a Democrat, but like this populist moment is upon us, and it is completely, as Chuck said, reshaping who we are, but it is driven in a lot by something voters want, which is not limited government, free markets, and American leadership in the world, based around character and personal responsibility, which is what I was attracted to as a Republican. But the Republican Party right now, if you ask them about Ukraine, they don't want to fund Ukraine. They do not want to fund Ukraine. And that's why people who are former want to fund Ukraine. Mitch McConnell wants to fund Ukraine. And you know what Republicans, the Freedom Caucus, says about Mitch McConnell? They say, Mitch McConnell, Ukraine, calling him a Democrat for his support of Ukraine. And so the extent to which nothing is as it was before and nothing is going back is the thing that I want you to take away. If you think like, oh boy, Donald Trump is going to eat that fatal cheeseburger and he's gone, like that's, people do that. Listen to me. The entire Republican field who ran this time, I'm not even joking, their plan for winning was something Trump goes to jail or dies. That was their plan for winning. They didn't have another plan. And so, but when that happens, the party is irretrievably changed, and it is not going back to a party that is recognizable to Republicans who answered that question.
Well, we need two parties in a two-party system, so that is depressing.
I'm great at parties.
So, so there's two things. First is if Donald Trump, if something kills Donald Trump, it's not going to be a cheeseburger. He's not going to eat a cheeseburger. I feel like those give him life at this point. It's going to be like someone sneaks a piece of asparagus, and that gets him. But Sarah, I'm really glad you mentioned the role of right-wing media here, because I think it's an often underrated element of the dynamic. Right-wing media does not have the same interest in Republicans winning elections as Republican elected officials do. Right-wing media is just interested in making money and like enlarging its audience. And that is sort of, in a lot of ways, the exact opposite kind of incentive that elected officials have. And so to the extent that right-wing media ends up having this incredibly powerful pull on how voters behave and how elected officials behave, it does negatively impact the Republican Party's ability to be able to look at a broad electorate and say, how do we assemble a majority? And that's sort of a muscle that I'm not sure the Republican Party has anymore. It's likely beyond the scope of this panel, but it's so interesting to me that for as much as liberals revile someone like Karl Rove's great ambition was a permanent Republican majority, a permanent electoral majority, a popular vote majority for the Republican Party. I was struck when Nikki Haley announced her campaign, where she made note of the fact that Republicans had not won a popular majority in years. And to my mind, so much of in addition to the effective media, so much of the maladaption happening in the Republican Party, I think it's what it is Republicans have abandoned the idea that it is even possible for them to win popular majorities. And if you want to hold power without winning popular majorities, that leads you to very ugly places by definition. Even if we don't elect a president by popular vote still matters. Popular legitimacy still matters in the American system. So I think that's a really kind of powerful thing, and I think the former elected officials are very aware of this. But there's no way to kind of inculcate this into certainly not conservative media and certainly not Republican voters. The other thing I'll make note of, and a reason to think that nothing's going to be the same after Trump, is that, and we've sort of just witnessed this with the inability of the Republican House majority to really act as a majority, right? Or one thing a majority should be able to do is elect a speaker, but this one can't. And if we were any other if we were a parliamentary democracy, the shenanigans last year would have resulted in snap elections, right? Can't elect the speaker, we got new elections. Because the thing the majority should be able to do is produce a speaker. And the fact that over the last 15 years, the Congressional Republican Party has basically lost all of its policymaking expertise, has lost most of its institutionalists of any real note, and is sort of kind of degrading before our eyes into a collection of, glorified influencers and the occasional leader who tries to wrangle them in a futile attempt to do anything. That's not changing anytime soon. And even with Trump gone, whenever that happens, I think we're going to continue to see a profoundly dysfunctional congressional Republican Party for some time. That is going to make governance, whoever's in power, extraordinarily difficult.
Can I just add one thing? One of the problems, and you sort of referenced this, Sarah, is that we're in a vicious cycle, right? Because you will hear a lot of people say, well, we can't call Trump out on this Biden legitimacy thing or his being a threat to democracy because our voters say these things. But in political science, one of the things we know is that voters follow the leaders, right? So it's a real vicious cycle that we're in.
Can I introduce, though, another issue here? And that is because the Republicans who wanted small government lost the argument. And because that argument's been lost, so now the debate is really between two types of big governments, right? One is a benevolent big government, one is strong big government, less benevolent at times. But I think one of the problems is that in losing the argument about big government, essentially Paul Ryan losing the argument, and Mitt Romney losing the argument, is that it's just been filled with this. The assumption is, okay, that lost, and now it was just sort of a search to win, right? Whatever you could find to win. So you say the word populist, which of course can mean anything, right? But I think this issue, when Trump goes away, it's still going to end up being cult of personality driven because there isn't a coherent vision yet. Now, I do think, frankly, the Democrats are going to go through this too. I mean, what Jamel said earlier, there's one issue that unites the Democrats, essentially. I guess two. One is the Dobbs decision was bad, and two is Trump is bad. But there's a lot of disagreement everywhere else. And when given the opportunity, the party's going to have a good debate. And it's going to be messy, and it's going to be ugly. They just haven't had, the threat of Trump has allowed a lot of people to basically saying, we want to debate this, but not now. And I think when Trump goes away, I think there'll be an attempt at a similar debate inside the Republican Party. But frankly, it just needs to, I don't know what they stand for. I don't know what what does the word conservative mean anymore? Do you know in the exit polls, they're almost useless to look at. Well, they're useless for a lot of reasons. But this year, because unfortunately we didn't buy enough of them. But that's network budgets and all that stuff. But there's this, Trump's been winning very conservative voters, which for those of us that have been reading exit polls, very conservative. It just sort of, Donald Trump's not very conservative. Well, he is if he is the definition of what conservative is, right? Mm-hmm. So I kind of think we're in this sort of weird period where we don't have the agreed upon definition of conservative among people that call themselves conservative is supporting Trump. There's no other word for it. So there's no doubt this doesn't go away. It'll be filled by the cult of personality stuff, but at some point there needs to be a debate inside the Republican Party. What is it?
Well, don't diminish Biden's cult of no personality.
Which one?
Biden's cult of no personality. No, actually, he is a perfectly fine personality, I'm sure.
That's an on the way homer.
The only thing I was going to say is they had the debate, and the debate is that the real conservatives, the true meaning of it, lost, as you noted, and that Trump has won. And he's won for the foreseeable. Trump has this unique, and it goes back to why he's doing better with new and different demographics that make political scientists be like, but this bucket used to be over here. He's a celebrity. The number of people, this was one of the first things when I started doing focus groups that I was like, oh yeah, I didn't watch The Apprentice. Why would I watch The Apprentice? What a dumb idea. This guy who I've never liked in popular culture who pretends he's a business person. But for a lot of voters, not only do they feel like they know him, they feel like, I mean, if I hear the phrase in a focus group, Trump's a businessman and he'll run the country like a business, and when you ask them, like, oh, did you watch The Apprentice? They're like, yeah. Like, they don't mean run a business the way a real person runs a business. They mean like he fired Gilbert Godfrey once on The Apprentice. Like, that's a different thing. But that's what they mean. And so, like, his celebrity and his connection to people, it just, things are, my point is only to say that things are incredibly scrambled. And so you should, people who are trying to put them in neat, nice buckets, like, throw a lot of that stuff out.
So we're nearing the end. I'm gonna ask a couple. This panel is amazing. So I'm not gonna cut us off right at the. Two more things I want us to do. One other thing we learned from this survey of former members of Congress is that about half of them said they or their family had been threatened, right, while they were in office, and the numbers increase the closer you get to today, in terms of when they served. Much higher numbers for women and people of color, much higher numbers. And it's not just members of Congress, it's at every level. In fact, we had a great panel that talked about this yesterday. Donna, how worried are you? 84%, by the way, of former members of Congress said they're concerned about violence in the 2024 election, related to the 2024 election. How concerned are you, Donna?
Very. I do think that I look at this through a, sort of a span of time. When I came out of Congress in January of 2017, and I went out on the road on my RV. And I was in an RV park in Florida on Inauguration Day, and there was literal euphoria in the entire campground. I drew a conclusion later on that Democrats are tent campers and Republicans are RV campers. This is true. And one of the things that I found is it was euphoria and it was exciting and everything, and people were listening to to the inaugural address and very excited. The thing that changed from January 2017 to when I was just out like last year is that in the RV camps now, there are Trump flags, there are Make America Great flags, there are Great Again flags, there are, and people are really aggressively angry toward people that they think is, somebody else. And I think that that's actually what's happened over these last years since the 2016 election, that there is more open anger with people you disagree with, that members of Congress are feeling it. You talk to members who are retiring now, and they say that one of the reasons they're retiring is because they're retiring after having experienced January 6th, which is, just such a radical idea that people would leave Congress because they don't want to exist in an environment that threatens themselves and their families, and they don't think that public service is worth it anymore. And I think that this is something that should concern all of us. And, so when I look at members who served many years ago, really starting from about the time of the Tea Party movement in 2009 and 2010, you do see this escalation of violence, and you see that reflected in the survey where former members describe feeling threatened in this environment. And, it's not like the candidate, Trump, doesn't promise that kind of violence or, in some cases, he actually doesn't allude to it. He just says it, bloodbath. And I think that people are taking that to heart. I mean, you take a look at some, recent incidents of, driving through an FBI, trying to drive through an FBI headquarters. People are actualizing what it is that they feel their leaders are giving them permission to do. And that is what is different today than in past years where at least our leaders didn't call for the violence. And now we have leaders who are doing exactly that.
Yeah, so I study this stuff, and it's very important that we demand that our leaders reject political violence. And unfortunately, we've seen elite failure in some cases in terms of doing that, because it's not a lot of people. Don't expect a ton of violence, but the threat of violence already hangs over every level of our political process, from just the people who are working at elections, at polling stations. Brad Raffensperger, obviously, who was here yesterday, and obviously members of Congress throughout, and it's a very troubling thing. I want to get everybody on a sort of pair of questions, really look into the crystal ball. If Trump narratives after elections are usually Rorschach tests, but they're part of that learning process that Chuck alluded to. Eventually, you learn, and maybe you get a candidate like Paul's old boss, who shifts things away from the left in the Democratic Party. What is the narrative if Trump wins among Democrats? And then flip that, what is the narrative among Republicans if Biden wins?
Well, with Democrats, the narrative will be fact-based, and those facts haven't happened. The Democrats are still living in the fact-based universe. So they're going to have to see what happened. Maybe we continue to underperform with black
This
voters.
is the crystal ball.
Right, but I mean, right now, the Democrats' problem is young people and black folks, if you ask me.
Yeah.
I want the campaign to do a good job and earn those votes back. But on the Republican side, it's like when I used to run campaigns and we had debates, I wrote the press release before the debate began. Bill Clinton clustered Mahike, wiped him off the map. Perot and Bush had no idea what they're doing. Because I didn't give a rip snort what happened. Because I was there to flack, right? So I know with Trump and his supporters, and some of them are family and friends of mine, Trumpism cannot fail. It can only be failed. He lost the popular vote to Hillary, it didn't matter. He lost the Electoral College and the popular vote to Biden, it didn't matter. He said TikTok was bad and a tool of Chinese intelligence. I happen to think he was right about that. So it's like, okay, I'm with you, Mr. Trump. And then he meets with a TikTok, and everybody said, that's right, all the Trumpers, right? Oh yeah, well, TikTok's evil. He meets with a TikTok billionaire, and all of a sudden TikTok's good. And all my friends are like, yeah, TikTok rocks, I love TikTok. I'm like, shh, there's just no point in worrying about what they're going to say. They're going to say, if only we were worthy of the great Donald Trump, this country would be saved.
Jamel?
If Trump wins, I mean, I think there will be a lot of recriminations about not fielding a serious primary challenge to Biden. Now, I happen to think that there's sort of no world in which a serious primary challenge to Biden was going to end with either Biden not being the nominee or Kamala Harris being the nominee. Like, those were the two options. And so, to my mind, it would have been kind of pointless. But I think there'll be a lot of recriminations over that. I think there'll be a lot of recriminations over Gaza, honestly. I think that's going to be the thing. And there's also just going to be a lot of fear, right? Like, some of the most diehard Trump intellectuals, to the extent that we can call them that, are already floating, should there be a 22nd Amendment, right? Should Trump be able to run again in 2028? So I think that'll be, I think, dominating a lot of the conversation among Democrats. If Trump loses, I'm one of these people who does not think Trump is going away until he drops dead. I just don't. I think if Trump loses in 2024, he is the odds-on favorite for the nominee in 2028. For all the reasons we've discussed, that there isn't really anything else in the Republican Party other than Trump. And so it's like, if he loses, he already has a built-in narrative to explain it, right? It was stolen from me, there was fraud, et cetera, et cetera. So I think if he loses, and if we're looking at like a 2020 style loss, where it's sort of it's narrow but solid, uncontestable, he's going to be the nominee in 2028, and assuming he's long lived, if he loses in 2028, he'll be back in 2032. I think he's not going away.
They're going to do Weekend at Bernie's with him.
Right. Yeah, the more serious possibility is that I do think that in terms of his legal troubles, that basically the entire legal system, for reasons that I personally think are unjustifiable, are kind of waiting to see what happens in November. I think if he loses, there's a very good chance that everything just goes full speed and he ends up in prison. I think that's a real possibility.
Sarah?
you know, I think that if Donald Trump loses, and the reason I'm so emphatic about the fact that we're not going back is because I watched Republicans not be able to accept this. So I think Nikki Haley is going to sit there and be like, see, I told you so. And that's why we need to, rebuild this part of the Republican Party. And they will fail over and over again because Mike Pence running for president was really interesting to me and illustrative of the fact that these politicians the former guys get it because they got out. People like Mike Pence who ran doesn't know anything about his voters. And I'll tell you, if Mike Pence went to a Trump rally, could he go without armed security? No, he couldn't. They don't just dislike, this is the thing, they don't just dislike Mike Pence, they don't just dislike George Bush or Mitt Romney. They hate them. The voters of the party hate the people who used to run the party like a minute ago. And so there will be an attempt, I think, by the Republicans to, but they have to grapple with what is happening with the voters. And frankly, I think Democrats have to grapple with what is going on with their voters. Right now, when I listen to young voters talk about who voted for Biden in 2020, but were like, I don't really want to, but he's the Democratic nominee. Now, it is about Gaza, and it is about Joe Biden being out of touch, and they might sit it out because they believe they're making a moral choice. The Democratic Party is being held together, and their fracture is being papered over by Donald Trump and people's opposition to Donald Trump, and maybe by their commitment to abortion rights. But there is a massive earthquake the political realignment has been going slowly, but things could break wide open as we go. And I think if Democrats win, there will be no soul searching on the Republican side, but Democrats are going to have to figure out how to not just be a political party, but how to build a big, broad, pro-democracy coalition that spans from Elizabeth Warren to Liz Cheney, and figure out how to make that the dominant political coalition in this country.
I think it's an impossible task to create Bernie Sanders and Liz Cheney in the same tent. It's just never going to happen.
I said Liz Warren because it was more alliterative, but sure.
I hear you. No. And I've thought about this long and hard, and I think it's simply only Donald Trump keeps that coalition together. Nothing wrong with it. There are moments in time where coalitions like that develop. Look, I think a Trump victory is going to split the Democratic Party in different ways. You'll have your ideological splits. You'll have your finger pointing. Yes, there'll be a lot of people angry that he ran. That's going to be the first recrimination. I agree with that. But then there's going to be this debate inside the party. If you can't beat him, join him. And I'm not saying join Trump, but use Trump tactics. And I think you are going to have a bunch of, and this is my great fear as a civilian here, as a citizen who thankfully, thanks to the state of Virginia, I'm not a member of any political party. You don't have to be. And I don't consider myself a member of a political party. But I think that there's going to be this fight inside the Democrats among those that say, we got to use Trump-style tactics to win. And then you're going to have the others that won't be comfortable going down that road. So I think it's going to create different types of divisions. Your traditional ideological division, by the way, that always happens when a party loses an election that they think they should win, right? The base always says, you weren't basey enough, whatever that is, right? You didn't do enough base, whatever that is. It happens on the right all the time, and you hear similar claims on the left, right? What happened after Hillary Clinton lost? A little bit of that. So you're going to have some of that traditional stuff. But the one part of this that I fear is a tactical divide. And then you will have Democrats who already are saying, hey, maybe we should create a liberal media ecosystem that creates our own narratives in the same way that this has been such a powerful force on the right. So, on that score, and look, and if Trump lost, I do agree with Jamel here. I think then the courts actually suddenly find their spine, right? Oh, now we can do this. Now it won't be as unpopular as we fear, or our legitimacy could get called into question, which then probably does at least accelerate a forced reckoning of at least finding, okay, who's the heir apparent? It's Donald Trump Jr.'s party versus, I know all of you are like, it'll be Jr. versus J.D. Vance for control, right, of the industry. But I wonder what Liz Cheney's going to do. And meaning like, she is not, I don't expect to see her at a Democratic convention. I don't expect her to be working in the Democratic Party. I expect her to start a new party if that is the alternative. And that could be what happens. Look, we haven't been this divided. I just went through the work here in my last column. In the 20th century, there were just 5 presidential elections decided by 5 points or less. In the 21st century, 5 of the 6 that we've held have been decided by 5 points or less. And the last time we had a streak like that was 1868 to 1892. So as with you, Jamal, I don't like talking about that era, but gosh, there's a lot of rhyming that goes on. But that was also an era of a lot of upstart political parties. So I sort of I think that's a potential result, is you'll start to see all sorts of maybe smaller attempts, smaller insurgencies, because I think they'll be either not sure how to overcome the Trump wing of the party, and so maybe you have some competitive parties on the right. And like I said, on the left, I just think it becomes a huge fight, not just over ideology, but over tactics.
That historic parity that Chuck is talking about since 2000, and maybe a little bit before, actually, we don't know with Ross Perot, but that historic parity is a big part of the polarization story that people don't talk enough about. The fact that we're not just polarized, but we're polarized in a very, very closely, and it may be a cause, actually, not just an effect. Also, there is a liberal media ecosystem. It's called late night comedy. Just turns out it's not very good at mobilizing people. There's research on this, folks. Donna, bring us home.
Look, I don't know whether I will. I am so bad at this, Larry. Pre-Trump, I once predicted that Liz Cheney would be the Speaker of the House. That's how bad I am at this.
Hey, there's still time.
I just,
I mean, they could have a new speaker in a
like,
couple weeks.
well, that's true, but it won't be Liz
she does-
Cheney. But it's hard. It's just hard to imagine. I mean, the Republican Party that I kind of grew up with is just non-existent right now. And I don't think, and I agree with Sarah that I don't think that it is a matter of Trump losing and then things are going to be reshaped. It's just going to have to be built. Whatever that opposition party is to the Democratic Party is going to have to be rebuilt. And I think that, I'll go with the Trump losing scenario first. If Trump loses and, say Democrats are able to pull out either getting the House or keeping the Senate and they have the White House, I do think that you're going to start to see some of the divisions that already are present in the Democratic Party, at least in the Congress and particularly in the House. They're there. And even when Pelosi was Speaker, those divisions are there. They just haven't been able to play out because Trump has been in power and Republicans have been going through their craziness. I don't think that it plays out in the same kind of way, however, because I think there are some unifying themes within the Democratic Party, and they have to do with the basic role of government. I think Democrats, whether they're progressive Democrats or they're centrist Democrats, believe that there is an important and legitimate role for government to play in making people's lives better. And I think that that is unifying among Democrats. Now, on a policy level, people are going to be all over the map about what you do in terms of solutions. If Biden loses, I do think that Democrats are going to have to we'll come back to this moment on Gaza and Israel. I think that it will be clear to me, and I'm not even sure right now that the president has the ability to make the kind of policy shifts that are necessary to bring those people back. Maybe they won't show up for Trump. They won't show up for Trump. They just may not show up. And it's unclear to me, even in April, whether the president has the ability to bring those people back into the tent. I think there also are going to be some recriminations around how aggressively Democrats went after Trump instead of playing the sort of, the high road game of talking about the important infrastructure investments and the robust numbers on the economy that people aren't necessarily feeling in their lives. And they're are going to be some people who will think that they should have gone full bore at Donald Trump. And so, and then lastly, I think that if Biden loses, there will be a complete reshaping of the Democratic Party. We know that in 2028, it's going to be an entirely different cast of characters, and so the fight for the Democratic Party is going to play out in a very different way than we've seen over these last 8 years.
Can I say one thing that I think it's actually important to say? We're talking about the Trump win scenario as if he wins outright, a popular vote victory and an electoral college victory, but I think it's important to consider the possibility that it's another 2016 and consider what that means for actual civil stability in the United States, that the president has won 2 elections without ever winning a popular majority and reshape the country doing it. This is actually the thing that makes me very worried, that it almost happened 4 years ago, and if not for like 70,000 votes here or there, Biden would have won, 8 million more votes than Trump and lost the election. It's not hard to imagine Biden winning 10 million more votes than Trump and losing the election. And that is the thing I think Americans need to start thinking seriously about what we can do to prevent those kinds of outcomes. Because more than partisanship, more than our ideological differences, that is a recipe for very real, I think, civil strife.
I call that scenario the reverse Grover Cleveland. Look it up. That was. Weren't you born under the Cleveland administration? Yeah. Okay. Let me close with this. This has been a fantastic panel. We are polarized today, very polarized. We've been polarized before, but a key feature of today's polarization is that it's partisan polarization. And partisan polarization, unlike the polarization about civil rights or the feminist movement or Vietnam or other things in American history, puts democracy in the crosshairs. When it's the 2 parties battling each other and it's partisan polarization. And when democracy is in the crosshairs, organizations like the Center for Politics with its pro-democracy mission are more critical than ever. So thank you, Larry, and thank you all for supporting the Senate. And yes, please join me in thanking this unbelievable panel. Unbelievable.